Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem, YAHAWASHI, Ba'ashem Harakhakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, from whom I learned the truth from. And also peace and salutation to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And the title of this video is going to be Yahawashi will return in the midst of a chaotic environment. Alright. I pretty much put this lesson together, as I was pretty much meditating on how, pretty much when the Most High sends Yahawashi back to deliver the elect, okay, Lord will not be of that number of the elect, he's gonna, Yahawashi is gonna come back and deliver us in the time where we're gonna need him the most, in the time where the earth and society as a whole is gonna be in the worst state ever. Looking at the direction that this world is going towards under the rulership of Esau, Edom, doing wickedness and evil and witchcraft and the working of Satan all throughout the four corners of the earth. All right, which is all going to, ultimately lead to war, World War III. As this world is going more and more left and more satanic. All right, and eventually, the powers that be are going to, crack down heavily upon those that are, speaking particular truths and, online, speaking out against this NWO agenda, and especially us, the men of the Lord that's on the highways and the byways preaching this word, this everlasting gospel. We know Esau is getting ready to crack down upon people that have, talking points against his NWO system. He's getting ready to come down with great wrath. Well, it's going to be times like this, that we're going to have to go through, as that's all a part of the straight gate that Yahawashi told us to enter to, but these times are going to be, the times that we're going to need the Most High Yahweh to send Yahawashi back to deliver us the most, as it's going to, all, lead to a chaotic environment throughout the earth. And as you can see, I have here on the screen the word chaotic from etomonline.com. It says, in a state of primordial chaos, irregularly formed. Okay, and then when you go down, it says meaning confused, disordered. All right, confused, disordered. And that's the environment that's going to be going on throughout the earth by the time Yahawashi comes back. Mass state of confusion. All right, division, wars, disorder, social unrest, civil unrest, civil war, just all these evil things going on throughout the earth. You see, and even Yahawashi told us in the book of Matthew, the 24th chapter, okay, which, this chapter is the chapter where Yahawashi was pretty much breaking down to his disciples the things that would be going on in the earth in a lot of days leading up to his second coming. Okay, so as Yahawashi went into right here in Matthew 24 verse 21, this is red letters, this Yahawashi speaking. He says, for then shall be great tribulation. See that? Great tribulation. And what is a great tribulation? All right, that Yahawashi is referring to right here. Okay, Jacob's trouble, pursuant to Jeremiah 30 verse 7. Okay, where it's going to be a time of trouble throughout the earth, especially upon Jacob, the Israelites, all right, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and why are these times going to be especially troublesome upon the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans? Because when you look throughout the earth, so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are the least prepared people on the earth for, the times to come down the pipe, for the direction that this world is going. The majority of our people that's out here that's, running to and fro throughout Babylon the Great, as well as throughout the earth as a whole. Okay, majority of our people have no idea what's going on in the world, where this world is going, how bad things are getting ready to get. They don't understand that Esau, Edom, so-called white man, their number one enemy, is getting ready to come down with great wrath upon them, okay, and establish his NWO agenda, okay, and implement the charagma. 2/3 of our people, they don't understand these things. And even those of our people that, have the Bible in their hands, calling themselves Christians, all over social media and TikTok, talking all this shit against the Israelites and the camps and whatnot. They have all this evil to say about the Israelites and this Israelite ministry and the camps and whatnot, but yet they have nothing to say against all the evil that's going on around the world before them by Esau, Edom, and these heathen nations. Because 2/3 of our people that they're going hard as hell are to save the heathen. Okay, that's getting ready to bring great tribulation upon them and troubles. Okay, but Yahawashi is speaking of Jacob's trouble right here in Matthew 24 verse 21. He says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." All right, verse 22. "And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." And let's read this in the NLT real quick. All right, verses 21 and Matthew 24 verse 20 verses 21 and 22 in the NLT. Yahawashi speaking. It says, "For there shall be greater anguish than any time since the world began, and it will never be so great again." So basically Yahawashi is saying what? That the times to come, Jacob's trouble, all right, also known as the Great Tribulation throughout Bible prophecy, is pretty much going to be the worst time on earth. The worst case scenario throughout all of world history. All right, ever since a nation was was born on the earth, right? And it says, verse 22, "In fact, unless that time of calamity is shortened, not a single person will survive." All right, no flesh will be saved, as I read in the KJV, but it will be shortened for the sake of the Most High's chosen ones, which is the elect of the nation of Israel. All right, Lord will not be of their number. So basically Yahawashi is telling us right here that Jacob's trouble, all right, the great tribulation that he's going into, is going to be so chaotic of a time that the Most High is going to have to shorten the days for the elect's sake. Which when we look at the earth right now, the Lord is already shortening up the days as we speak. Here it is. It feels like just maybe a month ago we were observing the Pesach, and now here we are. All right, in the latter part of June. All right, it's June. Okay, and we're just a few days away from July 2025. You see, in each day, each week is going by faster and faster. Each month is going by faster and faster. Each year is going by faster and faster. So the Lord Yahawashi is already shortening up the days and speeding up the days, all right, in these end times. And as well, we're reading right here, Yahawashi is telling us, when a great tribulation comes, when Jacob's trouble comes to pass, the days are going to be even shortened, all right, for the elect's sake. Okay, otherwise what? If the Most High wouldn't shorten up the days when Jacob's trouble hit, all right, no flesh should be saved. None of the elect would survive these times. Okay, so again, it's just all a testimony, from Yahawashi himself, describing how chaotic of an environment things are going to be on the earth leading up to his second coming. Okay, and speaking of his second coming, let's jump down in the chapter to verse 29. Okay, the glorious return, as you see at the subheading at the top of verse 29. All right, but Matthew 24 verse 29, Yahawashi also speaking right here. He says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days," all right, the great tribulation, Jacob's trouble, all right, "the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken." The stars falling from heaven is talking about, these different governments around the world, these different leaders around the world, basically, being taken out of their power, all right, during, World War III. Okay, and then it says, verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Okay, so when these things come to pass immediately after the Great Tribulation, immediately after Jacob's trouble, when World War III is going to pop off, when the missiles are going to be shot off, and these different governments are going to be taken down and fighting against each other in World War III. Yahawashi says again in verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Meaning what? In the midst of World War III, that's when Yahawashi is going to crack the clouds, with the holy angels behind him, okay, and make his second coming to the earth. All right, not as a man this time, a fleshly mortal man born through the seed of man. All right, but this time he's coming back in an angelic heavenly force. All right, with the armies of heaven, all right, the holy angels backing him up via the chariots, okay, the so-called UFOs. And it says, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, the chariots, with power and great glory. Okay, so at the appearing of Yahawashi coming back when he cracks the clouds, as it said again in verse 30, then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. The tribes of the earth, can pretty much be applied twofold, because one, of course, is talking about all 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, as again, these things are going to, Yahawashi is going to come back immediately after the days of, this great tribulation, Jacob's trouble, all right, trouble upon all 12 tribes, Esau, Edom, coming down great wrath, martial law, establishing his NWO agenda, okay, governed by AI and technocrats and all this pseudoscience and technology, okay, implementing the charagma, persecuting the prophets and the men of the Lord, us the hopeful elect that have this 100% gospel, preaching a new song, all right. All the tribes of Israel on the earth are going to be mourning by the time Yahawashi comes back. But as well, the tribes of the earth can also refer to, pretty much all humanity as a whole. Because all the earth, throughout the four corners of the earth, everything and everybody is going to be catching hell. Okay. When Esau loses his mind, for one last time before Yahawashi comes back. Okay. Matter of fact, let's look up this word mourn. All right. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. Let's look up this word mourn.
Strong's G 2875, Copto.
And it means to cut, strike, smite, to cut from, cut off. And then it says to beat one's breast for grief. Okay, to beat one's breast for grief. Then the Strong's definition, it goes into, it says to beat the breast in grief, cut down, lament, mourn, bewail. All right. So when at the time of Yahawashi coming back, there's going to be great lamenting throughout the earth, great mourning, great grief. You see, not only from all humanity as a whole, okay, throughout the four corners of the earth, but ultimately from the Lord's people, all 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Okay, but despite all of all of our people catching hell by the time Yahawashi comes back through this great tribulation, Jacob's trouble. Okay, verse 31. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds of the earth. Basically, all throughout the earth, north, south, east, and west. Says from one end of heaven to the other. Okay, so despite, all 12 tribes of our people catching hell and mourning by the time Yahawashi comes back, Yahawashi is only coming back to gather the elect amongst our people. Lord will not be of that number. He's only coming back to gather the elect of our people from throughout the four corners of the earth. Okay, to deliver us from all of our mournings and tribulation and grief that we're going to be going through, okay, in the times to come leading up to Yahawashi comes back. Okay, all this chaos and disorder and confusion that's going to be going on throughout the earth by the time Yahawashi comes back. All right. And now I want to get Second Ezra 13. All right, Second Ezra the 13th chapter. Okay, because now in this chapter, Second Ezra 13, the prophet Ezra, he basically received a dream. Okay, one night where he basically saw Yahawashi returning. Okay, in a great chariot, which he described as a mountain. Okay, in the midst of World War III. To take down the heathen nations and their armies in the valley of Yahawashi, pursuant to Joel, the 3rd chapter. Okay, destroying their armies and their weapons. Okay, and as well delivering the elect upon his second coming. All right, now I'm not gonna, start from the top and go through the whole vision, but instead I'm gonna just jump down to verse 25, where basically the angel was sent to Ezra to pretty much break down this dream that he saw, to give him the understanding of, what was going on in the dream, and pretty much break it all down to him. All right. So Second Ezra 13, I'm gonna start at 25. It says, "This is the meaning of the vision, whereas thou sawest a man coming up from the midst of the sea." Verse 26, "The same is he whom the Most High God, Yahweh, the highest, hath kept a great season." Okay. So basically he's telling them, the man that you saw coming up from the midst of the sea is the one who the Most High kept for a great season. Okay. Basically Yahawashi. He's telling them of Yahawashi. Right. And he says, "Which by his own self shall deliver his creature." See that? Because that's what Yahawashi is coming to do when he returns. Ultimately, to deliver, all right, the Lord's creature, which, what is the creature that it's referring to in this particular verse? It's talking about the elect of the nation of Israel. Okay, we literally just read about that in Matthew 24, verses 29 to 31. Okay, where when Yahawashi comes back, he's going to send the angels throughout the four winds of the earth, the four corners of the earth, to deliver, to gather his elect. Okay, the elect of the nation of Israel. Okay, so that's the creature that we're reading here in 2nd Ezra 13, verse 26, that Yahawashi is going to deliver upon his return. Okay, the elect of the nation of Israel. And it says, the latter part of verse 26, "And he shall order them that are left behind." All right, verse 27. Verse 27, "And whereas thou sawest that out of his mouth there came as a blast of wind and fire and storm." Verse 28, "And that he held neither a sword nor instrument of war, but that the rushing in of him destroyed the whole multitude that came to subdue him." All right, this is the interpretation. Basically, when you read up in his vision, Ezra saw, when Yahawashi returned, okay, in the midst of the heathen nations' armies fighting in World War III, he basically saw Yahawashi, as it said, okay, send out of his mouth as a blast of wind and fire and storm, which is talking about what? Okay, basically a major, high intensity laser beam being shot out from the bottom of the chariot, the so-called UFO. Because when you look at, okay, different pictures of the chariots, so-called UFOs, throughout the internet, throughout Google and whatnot, and even upon Esau's TV shows and his cartoons and his movies and whatnot, anytime Esau portrays what he calls a so-called alien, quote unquote alien invasion, and so-called UFOs invading the earth and making war against the earthly realm, he always portrays them what? Shooting out laser beams, okay, high intensity laser beams from out of the bottom of the so-called UFO, basically the mouth of the so-called UFO, which we know the so-called UFOs are the chariots of the scriptures, the chariots of Yahawashi, and as well the chariots of Israel. All right, and even our forefather, the prophet Habakkuk, in Habakkuk the 3rd chapter, described the chariots as chariots of salvation. You see, So it says again, 2nd Ezra 13, verse 27, and whereas thou sawest that out of his mouth there came as a blast of wind and fire and storm, and that he held neither sword nor any instrument of war, but that the rushing in of him destroyed the whole multitude that came to subdue him. This is the interpretation. Yeah, because when Yahawashi and the holy angels come back to make war against these heathen nations and their armies, they're not going to need any physical carnal weapons to take them down. A gun, mini gun, or a rocket launcher, or a missile launcher, or whatever. You know, a tank. All right. Yahushua and the angels aren't going to need any carnal physical weapons to take down Esau, Edom, and these heathen nations and their armies. They're simply going to take them all down and destroy them with just the pure power and the pure energy of the Heavenly Father. Okay, which is going to be working through the chariots. Okay, those laser beams and those intense blasts of fire and wind that's going to be shooting down out of the mouth of the chariots. That's the only instruments that they're going to use to take down the heathen nations and their armies. All right, in World War III, in the valley of YAHAWASHI, pursuant to Joel, the 3rd chapter. It says, verse 29, behold, the days come when the Most High will begin to deliver them that are upon the earth. Okay, which is going to happen upon the second coming of Yahawashi very soon. It says, verse 30, and he shall come to the astonishment of them that dwell on the earth. So when Yahushua comes back, he's gonna come back astonished at all humanity that's gonna be dwelling on the earth. He's gonna be seeing. He's gonna come back to see Esau's setting up his NWO system, global governing system that's all gonna be governed by AI and technocrats and AI robots and whatnot. Is going to see a major portion of humanity, with that charagma inside of them. Okay, pretty much being formed after the image of Esau, Edom through pseudoscience technology. All right, and even he's even going to be astonished at the heathen nations and their armies. Because you got to think, when in the midst of World War III, when these heathen be gathered up in the valley of YAHAWASHI, which is over there in Saudi Arabia in the so-called Middle East, not only are they going to have, of course, human boots on the ground, human soldiers, but they're also going to have, AI soldiers, which China is heavily investing in that right now. All right, AI robot soldiers and whatnot. Okay, just like you saw in the movie Terminator. All right. Along with robot dogs and drones and just all types of weaponry that the earth has never seen before, even to this very day. Okay, because you best believe in the midst of World War III, all right, Esau, Edom especially, as well as the rest of these heathen nations, they're going to be coming with some stuff that that will just blow your mind. All right, if you were seeing it, front row and center. They're going to be coming with all type of, technology and weaponry and, just all kinds of stuff that you would never imagine. All right. Things that even when Yahawashi comes back, he's going to be looking at like what the hell is this? What the hell have these heathen done to my father's creation? And even, not only are they going to have, of course, the heathen nations and their human soldiers fighting against Yahawashi when he returns, along with their robot AI soldiers and robot dogs fighting against them, their drones and whatnot. Okay, but even when Yahawashi comes back, he's even gonna find damn trainees in different militaries fighting against him, as that's heavy within Esau's military here in Babylon the Great America. Men that have turned themselves into women, with high ranking positions within the military, generals and whatnot. All right, regular soldiers. Yahushua is even going to find, all right, those types of people fighting against him when he returns. It's going to be just one big astonishment. Like what the hell is this, and what the hell is going on? And what the hell have these heathen done to my father's creation? Yahushua is gonna get all this stuff out of the earth. All right, all this wickedness. But it says, 2 Ezra 13 verse 30 again, and he shall come to the astonishment of them that dwell on the earth. Verse 31, and one shall undertake to fight against another, one city against another, one place against another, one people against another, and one realm against another. So, and what does that portrays? There's going to be war on all levels when Yahushua returns. Of course, not only war in the so-called Middle East, all right, in Saudi Arabia, the Valley of Yahushua, but there's going to be war on different levels, all right, all throughout the earth, especially here in Babylon the Great. Men are going to be fighting against women. Women are going to be fighting against men. It's going to be race wars, all right, class wars, political wars. Democrats versus Republicans. MAGA hats versus these liberals and these, Democrats and whatnot. Okay, and even amongst the nations, going to be little civil wars and skirmishes with amongst the nations. All right, especially amongst Jake. You're gonna have one group of Jakes fighting against another group, one gang against another. Bloods versus Crips and whatnot. One set fighting against another set, one neighborhood fighting against another neighborhood. All right, it's even gonna be war like that amongst Jake and these different, rest of these heathen throughout the earth when Yahushua comes back. And even as it went into, is even going to be one realm fighting against another realm. Meaning what? When Yahushua and the angels come back, it's literally going to be the heavenly realm, all right, Yahushua and the angels fighting against the earthly realm, all right, Esau, Edom, and the heathen nations and their armies. So it all entails what? It's all going to be just one big chaotic scene, okay, one big chaotic environment on the earth by the time Yahushua comes back, okay? So it says, verse 32, and the time shall be when these things shall come to pass, and the sign shall happen which I shewed thee before, and then shall my son be declared, whom thou sawest a man ascending. Showing you, point blank right there, that he's breaking down to Ezra that he's seeing a vision of the return of Yahushua. And then shall my son be declared. And notice this word son, S-O-N, is spelled with the capital S, showing that it's not just talking about any old son of the Heavenly Father. No, it's talking about the begotten Son of the Most High God Yahweh, which is Yahushua. Okay, he's going to come back and deal with all this chaos and confusion and madness that's going on the earth. All right, and as well deliver his elect out of all this madness. As the name Yahushua goes. YAHAWASHI, he deliverer. You see? So it says, verse 33, and when all the people hear his voice, every man shall in their own land leave the battle they have one against another, and an innumerable multitude shall be gathered together as thou sawest them, willing to come and to overcome him by fighting. Okay, which means what? That in the midst of World War III, in the Valley of Yahushua, as these heathen nations are going to be, all out fighting against each other, in one big royal rumble, so to speak, right? As they're going to be in the Valley of Yahushua, all fighting against each other, when they see Yahushua and the angels crack the clouds in the midst of all that infighting in World War III, they're going to stop, fighting against each other, okay, and gather together to fight against Yahushua and the holy angels, okay, to try to overcome him. But it says, verse 35, but he, all right, the he referring to Yahushua, but he shall stand upon the top of Mount Zion, meaning what? Yahushua is going to get the victory over these heathen nations and their armies that's going to try to come together to subdue him, okay? And he's going to obtain the authority of what? When Yahushua gets the victory, all right, Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and that's pursuant to Revelation the 19th chapter, okay, which also speaks of when Yahawashi comes back, he's going to judge and make war with the heathen nations and their armies, and take away their crowns, okay, and obtain a new rank, a new authority as Lord of Lords and King of Kings when it's all said and done. So it says again, 2nd Ezra 13 verse 35, but he shall stand upon the top of Mount Zion, and Zion shall come and shall be shewed to all men, being prepared and builded, like as thou sawest the hill graven without image. Okay, now the Zion that is referring to in verses 35 and 36 right here, okay, is referring to the elect. It says, it said again in verse 35, but he shall stand upon the top of Mount Zion. Meaning what? Of course, not only is Yahawashi going to get the victory over these heathen nations and their armies when he takes them down, but also we, the hopeful elect, which is like to Zion right here, are going to get the victory through Yahawashi. Okay, being prepared, being builded. All right, ultimately speaking of what? The new bodies. All right, the new bodies that we're going to receive, fashioned like unto Yahawashi's body. Okay, well, within those new bodies, Yahawashi is going to enter us into the new covenant, where he's going to put the laws and the commandments within our inward parts and program us to be perfectly righteous. All right, let's get a precept real quick, to prove that the Zion right here is talking about the elect, okay, and not the actual physical Mount Zion over there in the Holy Land right now. All right, this is Psalm chapter 125 and verse 1. All right, even as you see the subheading at the top of this chapter, the Lord surrounds his people. Okay, Psalms 125 verse 1. It says, a song of degrees. It says, they that trust in the Lord Yahawah shall be as Mount Zion, which cannot be removed, but abideth forever. See that? So those of our people that will trust in Yahawah, okay, which is us, us the hopeful elect. Okay, we trust in the name of Yahawah and this doctrine, this gospel, this testimony, this truth. Okay, along with the blood of Mashiach Yahushai. It says, they that trust in the Lord Yahawah shall be as Mount Zion, which cannot be removed, but abideth forever. So we, the hopeful elect, in prophecy, we're likened to Mount Zion. Okay, the dwelling place where the temple dwelt at in ancient times. And what did the temple serve to our people back in ancient times? It was a place where basically the Spirit of the Lord abided at on the earth. Okay, where the priesthood would offer up sacrifices for our people. Okay, to obtain mercy and supplication from Yahawah and to remain connected to Yahawah. Well, guess what? As we no longer have a standing physical temple, okay, now we, the hopeful elect, that have the Holy Spirit, that have this truth, this gospel, all through the name of the Heavenly Father, through his Son, Yahawah, we serve as the temple of the Lord in these latter days. Okay, we're built up as a spiritual house, as it speaks of in Peter's, and even the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, that we're the temple of the Lord, okay, where the Spirit of the Lord dwells in. You see? So we, the hopeful elect, we're likened to Mount Zion. All right? So let's go back to 2nd Ezra 13, verse 35 again. It says, but he, Yahawashi, shall stand upon the top of Mount Zion. Okay, Yahawashi is going to be exalted above the elect. You see? Verse 36, and Zion shall come and shall be shewed to all men, being prepared and builded, like as thou sawest the hill graven without hands. The elect are gonna receive those new bodies upon the return of Yahawashi. All right, and it says, verse 37, and this my son shall rebuke the wicked inventions of those nations, which for their wicked life are fallen into the tempest. Yeah, Yahawashi is coming back to rebuke the wicked inventions of these heathen. All right, the Charagma, the NWO system. Okay, these AI. Okay, which Esau and these heathen, they're going to be pushing AI as the new god of the earth and the new saviors of the earth, the new form of peace and safety and solutions throughout the earth. Yahushua is coming back to rebuke all of that stuff because it's all rooted in falsehood. It's lying wonders. It's counterfeit power. All right, all after the working of Satan, the energy of Satan. You see, along with all these these AI robots and AI robot soldiers and robot dogs and drones and the different weapons of these heathen nations. Okay, Yahweh's coming back to rebuke all of this stuff. All right, and it says, which for their wicked life are fallen into the tempest. And the wickedness of these heathen, especially their armies. Okay, their wickedness is going to cause them to fall into the tempest of Yahweh Shemashai, which is what? Being destroyed by those laser beams via the chariots. Okay, the blast, the wind, the fire, and the tempest that it speaks of in this chapter, that Yahweh is going to be blasting them with and destroying them. All right, without any sword or instrument of war. Okay, Yahweh is going to burn them all up. Okay, and turn them into the soil. You see, and it says, verse 38, and shall lay before them their evil thoughts and their torments wherewith they shall begin to be tormented, which are like unto a flame, and he shall destroy them without labor. Okay, he shall destroy them without labor, all right, without any sword or instrument of war, by the law which is like unto me. So all in all, pretty much the main point being is that this just further shows that we, the hopeful elect, Yahweh Shah is going to come back and gather us and deliver us out of a chaotic environment throughout the earth, where there's going to be war on all levels. Okay, as it speaks of right here in verse 38 again, one shall undertake to fight against another, one city against another, one place against another, one people against another, one realm against another. It's just going to be all out chaos on the earth by the time Yahweh Shah comes back. So these are going to be the times that we're going to need Yahweh Shah the most, because if the Lord didn't promise to shorten up the days when these things come to pass, no flesh should be saved. None of the elect will survive these times to endure to the end and be saved. Okay, because as it speaks of in First Peter the 4th chapter, in verse 17, it says, for the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of Yahweh. Because during Jacob's trouble, the Lord's going to be, of course we know the Lord's going to be bringing his judgment throughout the earth. Great famine, great tribulation, great death, the sword, great pestilences. All right. All out hell breaking loose throughout the earth. Okay, the Lord's going to be using these times to especially bring judgment upon his house, his people. Okay, the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Okay, and especially starting with those of us that know that we're Israelites. Okay, that know this truth. All right, that partake in his ministry. Okay, the Lord's going to especially begin his judgment at us. Okay, but it says, and if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of Yahweh? Yeah, those of our people that obey not the gospel of Yahweh Shemashai, referring to the 2/3 of our people. So the Lord is going to begin at those of us that know that we're Israelites. All right, begin his judgment, and then he's going to make his way down to the rest of the 2/3 of our people that obey not the gospel. Okay, and then on down to the rest of these heathen nations. Okay, and eventually, just full-blown bring judgment upon Babylon the Great, America, and make this place desolate. All right, but then it says, verse 18, and if the righteous scarcely be saved, who are the righteous? The elect. All right, which is likened to Mount Zion, as we went into a few minutes ago. It says again, and if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? All right, and let's look up this word scarcely. Okay, if the righteous scarcely be saved, the word scarcely
Strong's G 3433. Malis. Malis.
Means with difficulty, hardly, not easily, i.e., scarcely, very rarely. All right. Then a strong definition that goes into with difficulty, hardly, all right, with much work. Now, when it comes to the power of YAHAWASHI, which is omnipotent, is it going to be a hard or a difficult thing for the Lord to deliver His elect out of these chaotic times? Absolutely not. Okay, there's nothing too hard for YAHAWASHI. As a matter of fact, I believe the scriptures even speak about that. Let's see. Okay. All right. Well, let's read this. This Genesis 18 verse 14. It says, "Is anything too hard for the Lord, YAHAWASHI? Question mark. At the time appointed, I will return unto thee, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." Okay. And I believe there's another scripture. Okay. Let's see. Jeremiah 32 and verse 17. It says, "Ah, Lord Yahweh, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth by thy great power." See that? By thy great power. The omnipotent power of YAHAWASHI was the heaven and the earth made. It says, and stretched out arm. And then it says, "There is nothing too hard for thee." See that? There's nothing too hard to YAHAWASHI. Okay, there's nothing too hard for anything or anyone that's omnipotent, all powerful, limitless power. And then it says in verse 27 in the same chapter, Jeremiah 32 verse 27, it says, "Behold, I am the Lord Yahweh, the power of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me?" Question mark. And the answer is absolutely not. All right, there's nothing too hard or too difficult for YAHAWASHI, and especially when it comes to delivering His elect out of, dire, chaotic situations. Look at our forefathers of old, for example. Look at Enoch. Enoch had a testimony, just like we in these latter days have a testimony, preaching and prophesying of what, against the wickedness and the ungodliness is going on this earth. Okay, just like Enoch prophesied before the flood. Okay, before the time of Noah. He prophesied in that testimony, as you read in the book of Jude, that Enoch prophesied that the Lord was going to come back with the tens of thousands of His saints, which is what? The holy angels. YAHAWASHI coming back with the holy angels. To do away with all this wickedness that's going on the earth. All right. Same thing with Noah. All right. During the time of Noah, the Lord sent the flood to flood the whole entire earth. Okay, and destroy all humanity out of the earth, except for 8 souls. All right, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. All right, 8 souls. Okay, it wasn't difficult for the Lord to destroy the whole earth. All right, during the flood, and only save 8 souls. All right, so what wouldn't make you think it's going to be difficult for the Lord in these latter days to deliver His elect? Okay, the 144,000. Along with the rest of the large multitude elect men, women, and children of the nation of Israel in these latter days. What makes you think it's going to be hard or difficult, for the Lord to deliver His elect in these latter days? All right, but when you look at how the Lord is going to deliver us, the elect, in these latter days, from a fleshly standpoint, from a carnal eye, it's going to seem difficult because what? As we went into in this lesson. We're going to be saved out of some chaotic situations. All right, chaotic situations and chaotic environment that's never been seen all throughout world history. All right. So as this word scarcely goes into again, Strong's G3433, malis, it says with difficulty, hardly, not easy, i.e. scarcely, very rarely, you know. So things are going to be so chaotic, all right, so chaotic throughout the earth in latter days that, hey, us, the hopeful elect, we're going to scarcely be saved. We're going to be saved out of some very, very tight and difficult situations, all right. Matter of fact, let's read that in the NLT. 1 Peter 4 verse 18 in the NLT. It says, and also if the righteous are barely saved, see that? If the righteous are barely saved, what will happen to the godless sinners? All right. So yeah, the elect are going to be barely saved. All right, scarcely saved out of a chaotic environment throughout the earth when Yahawashi comes back. Okay, and as we read in Matthew 24, hey, when these things, really and truly intensify, the Lord's going to shorten up the days. Okay, He's going to speed up the times, because otherwise, what if the Lord didn't? No flesh of the elect will be saved. So pretty much, from this point going forward until Yahawashi comes back, things are only going to get worse and worse and worse, and more straight and more tight and more difficult. Okay, until Yahawashi comes back to deliver us. So pretty much, those of you that's out the hopeful elect out there amongst the nation of Israel, continue to watch and stay prayed up. Continue to stay in the spirit. Continue to be circumspect, be vigilant. Okay. Continue abounding in the work of YAHAWASHI. All right, because hey, we're getting ready to go through the tightest part of the straight gate. The part that we're gonna need Yahawashi to come back and deliver us the most. So I'm pretty much ended off right there. Lord willing, this video is edifying, and until next time, shalom.